All right, let's come back to an earlier story where we've been seeing how the COVID-19 virus, but particularly pertaining to lockdown, has been affecting families in different ways. And the issue of co-parenting in South Africa during this 21-day national lockdown has led to a lot of confusion and stress for divorced parents who share custody of their children. Since the national lockdown was announced, questions have been raised regarding whether a child whose time is shared between parents who live in different houses would be able to move between them during that time. Well, to discuss this, we're now joined via Skype by Shando Theron from Theron and Theron Divorce and Matrimonial Attorneys. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. I can only imagine the number of calls you've been receiving, particularly during this period of time. And there's probably no real precedent for the situation that we're in at this time.
Yes, Peter, it's totally uncharted territory. Everybody is scrambling, and just the speed with which this has happened to us. I mean, it was basically a month ago where this was something happening in another country in the Far East, and now suddenly we're almost in our second week of lockdown. So it's uncharted territory. There's been contradictory messages that have come out from government. We've had the Minister of Justice on March 26 issue certain directives which said that parenting plans should be adhered to during this time. And then on March 30th, we've had Lindiwe Zulu, the Minister of Social Development, state that children are prohibited from moving around. I think the bottom line to keep in mind here is a constitutional imperative, Peter, and that is that the best interest of the child is paramount in all matters concerning children. So a one-size-fits-all approach is not going to work here, and no regulation from any minister is going to override the Constitution. So I think common sense and what would be in the child's best interest is what we should focus on at this time.
All right, so best in the child's interest, might that be not moving around?
Well, Peter, it certainly would be. If you just look at the numbers game, the more people the child are exposed to, the higher the risk of the child getting infected. But what if the parent or one of the parents or that the parent that the child is currently with is a first responder or a policeman or somebody who is busy out there dealing with the public trying to save our country at the moment? Then the risk, even if that's the primary parent, then the risk of the child being infected might actually be higher. What if both parents are, one is a policeman and one is in the military or one is a doctor? Then possibly we're in uncharted territory here, but what would be in the child's best interest? I think what is needed, Peter, is common sense, which is obviously rather uncommon these days, and a sensible assessment of each situation. We're not going to have a one-size-fits-all. The child's best interest is going to be differently served in different situations. I think what we need to look at is the child's health. Number one, has the child got any underlying conditions? If the child is asthmatic or has an issue with the child's immune system, the child certainly shouldn't be moved around. What is the child's risk of infection between the two households? And what if the household has a vulnerable individual in the household, for instance, like an aged or an infirmed person, or in a lot of instances in our country, somebody who's aged and infirmed? So I think a sensible assessment is needed of, in a case-by-case basis, what is in the child's best interest. As it stands now, this appears to be slightly contradictory messages coming out from government, but I don't blame them one little bit. This is totally new and uncharted territory, and I think everybody's just doing the best they can at the moment.
Who would do the adjudicating? And given the numbers of potential questions and situations, it would be nigh impossible to sort them out in 21 days even.
Yeah, if it's going to be 21 days, it's that's the other question that's creeping up on us. And I think government's in a very tough situation. We're sort of damned if we do and damned if we don't. But let's say it's who would do the adjudication if one parent is acting in a manner that's not in the child's best interest. If, for instance, or there's changed circumstances, what if the parent itself becomes ill but then states that he doesn't want to release the child to the other parent? If a parent is not acting in the child's best interest, that person can run to the court on an urgent basis. And we're actually quite busy with matters like this at the moment. The courts would do the final adjudication, but I think what is needed now here is cool, level heads. This is not the time for parents to settle personal scores. and whatever issues they had before, this is not the time for it. This is time to think about the child's best interest, to think about if the child stays with you, what's the child's chances of getting infected? And if the child moves around between the houses, does it increase? Or if the child then goes to the other parent, does it decrease the child's risk of getting infected? And also something to consider, the child itself being a carrier and potentially going to a household where there's a person who themselves is vulnerable or at risk, who is aged and infirmed. As I say, Peter, this is new, uncharted territory for us. The bottom line is the constitutional imperative, which is the child's best interest. No directive from any minister can override that imperative. That's the bottom line. And I think common sense and cool heads and the child's best interest, if that's adhered to, and people and parents put their personal differences aside, we'll make it through this.
All right, so I would imagine then the idea that wherever the child was on day one of the lockdown, that's where the child stays, doesn't quite help because the circumstances are so different.
Peter, I think you've hit the nail on the head right there. That's exactly it. One size fits all is not going to. It's not going to fit here. We can't have a single approach for every situation. It's exactly as you say, because our circumstances are so varied. I mean, what if the child currently is with a parent who's a first responder, or who's in the police, or who's in the military, or who's involved in the medical services, who are on the front lines of dealing with this? That child could be at risk of being infected. So it's just each situation has to be looked at independently, and I think the constitutional imperative of the child's best interest is what should be adhered to. Now, no fault to the minister, Lindiwe Zulu. I understand completely why she said that children are prohibited from moving around. That would be a first response as well, because if you look at it just basically on the numbers, the less people the child is exposed to, the less the child risk of infection. But once again, the child could be in a household with parents, one parent or both people there who could be first responders. So that changes the whole situation upside down, or that parent itself could become ill. It's moving goalposts at the moment, and it's new territory for us all. So I think what we should focus on is the constitutional imperative of the child's best interest.
All right. In the short term, common sense seems to be the way to go. But do you get a sense that much like everything else has been disrupted by this pandemic, that new law might be written post-COVID-19?
I think new law is going to be written before it's even finished. I know there are legal challenges coming up right now in the courts to some of the directives that have been issued. So law is going to be written in the next couple of days, quite potentially. I don't know if new law is going to be written because of this. I think the Children's Act, if interpreted in the right way with a degree of flexibility, can also deal with the situation. Remember, just like the Constitution, Section 7 of the Children's Act deals with the best interest of the child. So that constitutional imperative is ingrained, very much ingrained in the Children's Act as well. It's just how do we interpret it with this completely new factual scenario? The speed, Peter, with which this has caught up with us. Less than a month ago, this was something happening in China. And now we're almost in the second week of our lockdown. Look at America, how they're scrambling. It's just the speed that this has overtaken us. It's going to be interesting times. It really is going to be interesting times for all of us.
All right, so we'll leave it there. Shando Theron, thanks so much indeed for your insights. And I think, as you were saying, the best way to look at this is common sense, what's in the best interest of our children. Thanks so much indeed for your time.
Anytime.
All right, that was Shando Theron from Theron. And Theron, divorce and matrimonial issues attorneys, are talking to us about the challenges, of course, that many divorced couples are probably dealing with right now, is to where do the children stay? And Shando there saying that, look, this one size fits all, the idea that wherever the children are on the day one of the lockdown, that is sufficient, certainly isn't going to help, because the circumstances of each couple are so very, very different. Okay, just another update for you.